Our ship touched down like usual, with the captain in the cockpit along with a pilot. It was Kavlay's shift, talking to the locals about where to park. In a slight departure from usual, this landing pad wasn't anywhere near the ground. It was on top of a cactus tree thing that, thankfully, very thankfully, didn't sway in the wind. I waited in the cargo bay with Z. He was a little twitchy, flicking his antenna and shuffling his legs and generally not holding still. I wasn't about to say anything about it, but I suspected Z wasn't a fan of heights. Luckily for him, the landing pad was broad enough that he didn't need to get close to the edge. Unluckily for him, Captain Sunlight has suggested that he be part of the delivery crew today, because he'd been there when we met the clients before, and they would be expecting him. With the amount he was flexing his pinches, you'd think he was the one the clients had offered to give a tour of their skyscraper cactus city. As the bay door started to open, Z asked me, "Did you check if that belt has a full charge?" "Yes, I did," I told him, pushing the button on my gravity belt to display a full line of power lights. "And Mimi even looked it over for loose wires or whatever. I'm all set." "Good," Z said, angling his torso so that his front half was higher, the Mesmer equivalent of standing up straight. I was continually amused by how much praying mantises resemble centaurs, and how much this particular alien species resembled Earth bugs. This wasn't the time to bring it up, though. The door was open all the way now, and there was Captain Sunlight come to lead the way out. I could see a cluster of many-limbed locals waiting outside in the bright sun. The landing surface looked like it was made of red rocks mined nearby. Hopefully they were stable on top of this cactus tree. The captain waved us forward, Z with the crates and a hover sled, and me singing my best approximation of the local greeting song. I'd practiced it on the way here. It was high-pitched but slow, like a songbird in slow motion. Or, more accurately, like a songbird trying to sing like a whale. This particular culture interacted regularly with their ground-bound evolutionary cousins, who wouldn't have made it past the first climbing spike on these cactus towers. The tree grabber in front stepped forward, chirping a reply song, then switching to the more recognizable trade language. "Greetings, we are delighted to smell you." He waved his mousy ears happily, all four arms folded in front of him. "And we you," replied Captain Sunlight, whose people actually said that kind of greeting themselves. Her yellow scales were extra bright in this song. "Would you like to inspect the merchandise?" They would. Z did his part by prying open the crates with his mighty mantis arms. I don't know why the supplier of these fruits insisted on packaging them this way, but it was good we had him along. And the tree grabbers all made a big deal of sniffing the fruits. The anti-grab belts in the other crate got sniffed too, though thankfully they didn't stink. I could smell the fruits from where I was standing. That sour smell made my eyes water even at a distance. But no one was paying attention to me, busy as they were with signing for the delivery on the tablet that Captain Sunlight held out. Z put the lids back on. I wiped my eyes and admired the view. It was a nice, scenic desert scrubland out there, with only the other cactus trees in the way. I could see the entire sprawling city where the ground grabbers lived, and just barely make out the buildings on the distant air grabber mesa. "Are you still interested in a tour?" someone asked. I turned back and smiled without baring teeth. "Yes, please." The lead tree grabber was returning the tablet to Captain Sunlight, while the others moved the crates onto their own low-tech wheel cart. Behind them, a hatch slid open in the red stones of the landing pad. Z towed the hover sled back toward our ship as soon as it was empty. Captain Sunlight looked up at me. "Travel with care," she said, which was a polite way of urging me not to trip and fall off the cactus. "I will," I told her, "and I have my phone if anything comes up." That covered a lot of ground. We'd already discussed keeping an eye out for possible delivery needs, off-world items that I might tactfully suggest to the locals. They wouldn't have thought to ask about the anti-grav belts if the subject hadn't come up in conversation the last time we were here. "Then kindly follow me to the hand path," said the many-limbed monkey mouse. Dang, what was his name? I thought. He had a name. It translated as just a sound. Chirp, right, that's what it was. I knew that. Totally professional over here. I kindly followed Chirp in the direction of the handpath. Which was over the edge, because, of course it was. Metal handrails like the kind I usually saw at swimming pools waited next to the steps. Chirp led the way. I set the gravity belt to catch me if I suddenly plunged downward, and followed. I like climbing, right? Big fan. I was all over the playground as a kid, and I never really stopped. It's particularly fun when I get to be the one who can reach things high up, or otherwise be appreciative of climbing a tree or a spaceship, or what have you. Occasionally I'll meet someone else who enjoys being above the ground. Most species seem to prefer being on a safe, level surface. Not these guys. Wow. I was glad that Captain Sunlight had insisted on the gravity belt, because this was intense. The entire city street system were basically ladders on the outside of skyscrapers. "This handpath is designed with elders and the occasional visitor in mind," Chirp called up to me. "Artificial steps and platforms placed regularly." When I looked down, I saw that he was indeed standing on a platform already, which even had a railing around it. There were more ladders on either side, and other platforms that could be reached with the help of metal handholds. "That's very considerate," I said. Other cactus trees were close enough that I could watch the agile citizens scurrying along the surfaces, using only the natural cactus spikes and small branches. Wild. "Do you have any handpaths inside?" I managed to make it sound casual as I stepped down onto the platform with a perfectly normal heart rate. There was a door here that I hadn't seen from above. "There are some," he said, "mostly for emergencies." I had to laugh. That's the opposite of where I'm from. "Really?" He perked up in curiosity. "How so?" "We have tall buildings like this that we made," I said, with a wave toward the towering plants. "Nothing on Earth grows this big, but we can build it, and we do all our travel between levels inside, except for emergency escape ladders on the outside." "Fascinating," Chirp said. "I suppose if you make the whole things yourselves, you can make sure the inside is strong enough to support as many rooms as you need." "Yeah, definitely," I agreed, laying a palm against the smooth cactus wall. "These are pretty soft at the core, huh?" "Oh, yes. That's why the rooms are kept strictly to the outer layer," Chirp said. "Come in, let me show you." He opened the door and I got ready to duck, since it was just under human height. Then a rapid succession of shadows passed over us. Chirp made an irritated click. "Air grabbers, come to get in the way again." I looked, curious to see what they actually looked like. Both the tree grabbers and the ground grabbers had complained about them last time. They looked a lot like I expected. Bats with skinny arms held close while they flew. Everybody seemed to have 6 limbs on this planet. And varying opinions about personal space. The air grabbers fluttered around the cactus towers, inspecting anything that caught their interest. They circled people carrying groceries. They poked their heads into open doors, only to get shooed back out. They arrowed in on the spaceship parked above, and they flew past me repeatedly, almost enough of them to run into each other. High-pitched voices floated on the breeze, but none of them addressed us directly. "Inside," Chirp said, opening the door. I followed him in. He shut it firmly, leaving the squeaking cloud of bats outside. The ceiling was a bit low here, but at least this was a proper civilized room, not something carved directly from the wet cactus innards. Multiple desks, counters, and couches made it look like an info center, or some other kind of just-arrived-from-above hub. I wondered if there was a lot of travel between cactus cities here. Several locals waited in line. Then someone else rushed in after us, complaining in her own chittering language, and she pulled up short when she saw the tall alien bent over by the door. "Hello," I said. "My greetings," she said, edging sideways. "Pardon?" With a quick arm gesture that was probably polite, one to her chest and 3 outward, she hurried off to stand in line. Everyone else was staring. I'd been stared at plenty in my time, so this was only a little awkward. I waved. Small windows that I hadn't noticed in the walls flickered with passing shadows. Chirp said, "I apologize for the air grabbers. They hardly make a visit pleasant." Is there any way to ask them nicely to leave? I asked. I assume you've tried discussing it with their leaders. Many times. Chirp looked tired. They don't care. As far as they're concerned, the air is their territory, and it's our poor luck that we have to breathe it. How rude, I murmured, not wanting to cast judgment on an alien culture. But my present audience more than agreed. Yes, they are very rude, Chirp said, working up to a proper rant. Shouting at them does no good since they just find it funny. Bad weather will make them leave, but that's a problem for us too, and hardly something we can conjure up on a whim. Though they did seem to dislike the sound of the wind through the observatory when half the windows were left open. That we could probably do on purpose. Not very helpful here, though. What kind of sound was it? I asked, half an idea forming. A very high shriek, he told me. Almost too high to hear. The wind did some strange things with those windows. I wonder if you could wall them off with noise, I said. Maybe, he said, not sounding terribly optimistic. Like I said, yelling doesn't help, and that's loud too. Somebody else scrambled for the door, complaining. This guy didn't even see me, just slamming the door and hurrying forward like he was ready to have words with whoever was in charge here. Maybe he was. More shadows passed over the windows. Can I try something? I asked. A quick loud noise? I'll do it outside. He looked curious at that. Go ahead. Just make sure not to startle anyone on the handpass nearby. Of course, I said. Then I turned my back on the staring eyes, opened the door, and stepped out to where I could stand up to my full height. No tree grabbers nearby. Perfect. I put 2 fingers in my mouth and let loose with the most ear-piercing whistle I could muster. Startled bats changed course in mid-air, flapping and diving to get away. A cloud of chattering alarm and confusion. Judging by the shadows, some of the ones from above had lifted off as well. I watched for a moment to see that they kept their distance, then I ducked back inside. That seemed to work, I told Chirp. Chirp was rubbing his ear. I'm not surprised. Very loud. How well did it work? I waved him outside to take a look for himself. He perked up when he saw how far the air grabbers had moved back. That's the best result I've seen yet. I'm sure some of it might be from the surprise of it all, but even so. You said the wind shriek was almost too high to hear, I said. Do you think the air grabbers can hear sounds that you can't quite pick up? Their ears were bigger, but what did I know? Now that, Chirp said decisively, is an idea worth pursuing. So there's this animal on my planet called a dog, I said, and a certain kind of whistle that only they can hear. By the time my tour was over, I had a representative of the city very interested in having us deliver some off-world noisemakers that might help them keep the peace. The rest of the tour was nice. They had some impressive architecture inside those cactuses, and everyone greeted me politely. I didn't fall off the side once. When I climbed back up the ladder to the landing pad, taking care not to focus on the long drop behind me, I was surprised to find a handful of air grabbers perched there in conversation with the captain. Chirp made a disapproving grunt, but said nothing as we walked over. Ah, welcome back, Captain Sunlight said to me. It looks like our next visit will involve a delivery of fruit to the other above-ground city in these parts. The air grabber in front smiled with sharp teeth. Ours is the best. As you say, Captain Sunlight agreed politely. We will need the items delivered directly to an entrance, said the air grabber. Not to the high ground. Is that something you can do? Chirp muttered something that sounded like, knew it. I'm sure we can manage that, Captain Sunlight said. Our ship has some very stable thrusters and talented pilots, and failing that... She looked at me. Someone experienced with anti-grav belts in high places. I chuckled and turned off the safety. That you do.